Hello, welcome to my channel. Today we're going to talk about one of the world's important straits, the Bab el-Mandeb Strait.
Exactly. This strait lies at the southern end of the Red Sea, between Yemen and Djibouti.
Its name also has a special meaning. Mandeb means tears, so Bab el-Mandeb translates to Gate of Tears.
That's a strange name. Why tears? Was someone crying here?
During the early Islamic era, this region was very active, but it was also full of conflicts.
And pirates. Any sailor who tried to pass through had a high chance of dying.
That's why it became known as the Gate of Tears.
There's another reason, too. The winds from the Indian Ocean hit this narrow passage like a mini storm.
Those winds pushed ships toward the rocks, especially the old ships that weren't strong enough.
Which caused even more shipwrecks and deaths.
Plus, just like the Strait of Hormuz, Bab el-Mandeb isn't deep everywhere.
Meaning large ships must carefully choose the right route, otherwise they'll get stuck.
So Bab el-Mandeb isn't just a simple passage. It's a dangerous and strategic choke point in maritime history.
And even today, it remains one of the most important sea routes in the world.
After the ancient Achaemenid Canal, which later became the Suez Canal, Bab el-Mandeb lost its importance.
Because the northern route didn't allow ships to enter the Mediterranean.
Then we reach the year 1798, when Napoleon Bonaparte took Egypt from the Ottomans.
And later, by 1869, the French who were in Egypt realized that if they dug a canal, they could connect the Red Sea to the Mediterranean.
That meant ships traveling from Asia to Europe would have a much shorter route.
So they prepared the initial plans, started digging, and the modern Suez Canal was built.
Once that passage opened, Bab el-Mandeb regained its importance.
And it became one of the key choke points in global trade.
Britain, whose #1 enemy was France, came to see what the French were doing in Egypt.
They noticed the French were building a canal to connect the two waterways.
The British quickly realized that Bab el-Mandeb would gain new importance.
They thought, let the French dig the canal. We'll seize Bab el-Mandeb and control it ourselves.
That way, the French canal would be worthless without Britain's approval.
So they occupied Perim Island, right in the middle of the strait, and stationed themselves there.
You should also know the Italians were already present in the region, in what is now Eritrea.
But they weren't as strategic or clever as the British.
You might wonder why the British didn't take Yemen.
Because at that time, Yemen was still under Ottoman control, and the British didn't want to start a war with them.
When the French realized that the British Navy had taken Perim Island in the middle of the strait, they didn't fight them.
They saw it was pointless, but instead they moved to the western shores of the strait and occupied part of Africa.
At that time, that region was considered northern Somalia.
The French separated that area and gave it a new name, Djibouti.
Djibouti was created solely to control the strait by the French.
And interestingly, Djibouti remained under French control until 1970.
Eventually, the French were forced to make Djibouti independent.
From then on, the Bab el-Mandeb Strait was overshadowed by the Suez Canal.
Everyone considered the Suez Canal highly important, but few paid attention to Bab el-Mandeb.
Until the years 2013 and 2014, when the Houthis in Yemen gained significant power.
During this period, Iran supported the Houthis.
Saudi Arabia and the UAE, seeing this support, backed the Republic of Yemen.
And that triggered the civil war in Yemen.
A conflict that reminded the world once again of Bab el-Mandeb's strategic importance.
This war still hasn't ended.
It has lasted for more than 12 years, but the Houthis can be considered the winners.
Why? Because they control Yemen's key cities and the Bab el-Mandeb Strait.
The conflict continued until 2018.
In that year, the Houthis targeted Saudi oil tankers in the strait.
And they forced Saudi Arabia to stop using this route.
If Saudi ships were north of the strait, they had to exit through the Suez Canal.
And if they were south of the strait, they had to go around Africa via the Cape of Good Hope.
By 2023, the Houthis once again began attacking ships.
This time they targeted American, Israeli, and British vessels, claiming it was because of the Gaza war.
Their actions caused a sharp decline in traffic through Bab el-Mandeb.
Even ordinary ships from other countries struggled to pass through safely.
Why? Not only because of the Houthi attacks, but also due to insurance costs.
The insurance premiums for crossing the strait skyrocketed.
As a result, many ships chose the longer route.
They sailed around southern Africa instead of paying the heavy insurance fees for Bab el-Mandeb.
Despite all these troubles, still about 12% of global maritime trade passes through Bab el-Mandeb.
The route is so short and cost-effective that some ships prefer to pay high insurance fees to arrive faster.
By early 2024, the situation eased a bit.
More ships began crossing again, including Saudi vessels.
Because there was an agreement allowing them to pass.
But when the Houthis suspected an Israeli ship was crossing, they didn't use missiles or drones.
Instead, they landed helicopters directly on the ship.
They stopped it and escorted it to shore.
In March 2025, American warships entered the region to put the Houthis in their place.
But despite U.S. pressure, the Houthis didn't back down, and a new war began.
This was an air war, bombing Yemen from the skies.
The bombardment lasted for 2 months, but eventually they had to agree to a ceasefire.
Because they realized it was pointless and only civilians were being killed.
Time passed until February 28, 2026.
On that date, the U.S. and Israel launched an attack on Iran.
And news agencies reported that the Houthis might also join the war against Israel.
Even though about 7 weeks have passed since the war began, the Houthis have only engaged in limited clashes.
And they still haven't closed the Bab el-Mandeb Strait, because if they did, the global economy would face a severe crisis.
You might think the Houthis don't have much power.
But the Islamic Republic has provided them with drone and missile technology.
In fact, they produce drones and missiles inside Yemen itself.
Military experts say the Houthis don't even need to fully close the strait.
They only need to make it slightly unsafe.
And that alone is enough to pressure global trade.
When insurance companies refuse to cover ships, it practically means the strait is closed.
And that drives global prices higher while the economy starts to decline.
You should know that closing the Strait of Hormuz puts the greatest pressure on Asia.
Especially on countries like South Korea, Japan, China, and India.
But closing Bab el-Mandeb puts the greatest pressure on Europe.
Because all goods from China to Europe must either pass through Bab el-Mandeb or detour around southern Africa.
That means longer time, higher costs, and more expensive goods for Europeans.
In fact, these two straits, Hormuz and Bab el-Mandeb, are vital arteries of the global economy.
If either one is blocked, the world economy suffers a heart attack.
And that shows just how strategic these choke points really are.